Robert Davis, welcome back to Nature of Reality Radio. You reached out to me because you have things you want to talk about and updates of sorts. I believe you have some UFO and ET news that you want to talk about. Your website also says that you have a lot of things involving consciousness and metaphysics, and talk about that, of course, if you want. But I believe it was UFO updates, and boy, there's a lot of stuff that we can talk about there regarding updates, because that seems to be something that people are not really giggle factoring about much anymore. You could talk about UFOs and ETs now, and people will actually want to listen to you rather than call you a lunatic. So it's great to have you on again. You can introduce yourself, life story at all if you wish. We already did in the first interview, so I don't know if it's really necessary, but knock yourself out if you want to do it. And then you can talk about whatever it is that you wanted to talk about regarding updates, and I will jot down notes and all that as we go along. Anything that we should elaborate on that I hear that you discuss, and any questions that pop up in my mind, I'll use your website as a guide too throughout the program. So without further ado, well, introduce yourself if you wish, life story if you wish, and then what is the big news that you want to talk about that made you decide to reach out to me to be a guest on my show again? Talk all you want. You got the floor.
It's a pleasure to be with you again, Andrew. And the big news, basically, is that I've completed a documentary called The Consciousness Connection on Amazon Video, and a book also called The Consciousness Connection, Extraordinary Human Experiences and the Nature of Reality, based on 3 unique personal encounters I've had, call them extraordinary human experiences. One involving an orange orb in the night sky in Sedona, Arizona. While I was walking one evening, I observed out of nowhere, about 500 feet up, half a mile out, a round circular orange orb suddenly appears out of nowhere. As I'm watching it, a second one appears, either coming from within it or behind it, and the 2 remain stationary for a period of a few minutes. Suddenly they wink out, and it got more than my curiosity, but that got me going on the rabbit hole, because I've been a materialistic scientist most of my life, Andrew, although I always had a unique interest in UFOs. You know, growing up in the 60s, I guess it instills that in you, with the science fiction of the time and the space race to the moon, as you know. So I didn't speak about it with my colleagues at that college, of course, for the obvious stigma associated with it. But so I wrote a book. I had to research it. I had to learn more about it. I was in awe. What could it be? It doesn't mean that it's extraterrestrial or interdimensional, of course, but I still had to try to figure out what it was, because it was so unusual, an awe-inspiring event like millions of people who have extraordinary human experiences. And that's why, Andrew, we need a paradigm shift. And that's why I did a documentary with Dave Wilson and Wilson Hawthorne, my co-producers, to raise awareness among the population that consciousness is largely primary, not the brain. The brain, in a sense, is an epiphenomenon of consciousness. And I see that because of the unique experiences that I've had even since the observation of the 2 orange orbs in the night sky in Sedona. One morning, for instance, I woke up to a lucid dream. I was suffocating to death. I never had such a hyper-real sensation of dying. I felt like I was suffocating to death. At the same time, Andrew, I've had the strong impression that my colleague Anne, who worked with me in the laboratory, had died. I was shaken by the lucid dream, but I never was considering that impression I had that she died was real, until I entered the laboratory that morning and saw the tears on the faces of my colleagues, indicating certainly that she did die at the same time that I had that lucid dream, whatever you want to call it. Call it a shared death experience or an empathic death experience. That led me to write the book Life After Death, an analysis of the evidence. Again, I'm asking myself, what happened? Why me? What does it mean? like many hundreds of millions of people worldwide who have these kinds of experiences. These extraordinary human experiences fall under the heading of near-death, out-of-body experiences, kundalini awakenings, shamanic journeys, interactions with unidentified aerial phenomena or non-human intelligences, which still occur, synchronicities, among many others. But consciousness seems to be an underlying factor in all of this, and that's what the documentary and book try to portray through an analysis of extrasensory perception and out-of-body experiences, the history, in other words, of Bob Monroe and Monroe Institute, and J.B. Ryan, the father of parapsychology. But getting back to my experiences, the last one I had, Andrew, really knocked my socks off, was a Kundalini awakening. A woman at the end of a lecture that I gave in Australia one day invited a number of people up to a hotel, and she said, let's start some healing. And she started to just speak about removing negative attachments, removing engrams, cleaning out the negative energy of your body, etc., etc. Oh, I suddenly started to cough and I couldn't stop. This was going on for 20 minutes. But I felt wonderful. I never felt such energy in my life that was so positive in nature. So I asked her, can we do this one-on-one the next day in my hotel room? To which she agreed. While she was doing the same kind of uh, wording, let's say, she was conveying an intention more than the words she was using, I think, that initiated an energetic awakening in me. Call it a Kundalini awakening. And for anybody who doubts the validity of a Kundalini awakening, they shouldn't, because it is indeed real and very powerful. My body, for instance, was going into involuntary spasms. I was contorting, but my facial muscles were being stretched to the max, and I had no control over it, Andrew. This is what was unique about it. I was not doing this. You see the duality involved here. This is what I was questioning, because while this was occurring, while this may have appeared as if I was being tortured, I was actually experiencing sheer bliss. I was experiencing wonderful sensations, despite the appearance of a body that was in a state of flux, let's put it that way, or not in control. But I had that sense of, I'm not my body. I can't emphasize that more strongly to the audience, because you have to experience it to understand the duality between the mind and the body, which I did as a result of that awakening. That led me to write the next book, Unseen Forces, Integration of Science, Reality, and You. That led to the documentary that served as the framework for the documentary, The Consciousness Connection, on Amazon, because here I had 3 extraordinary human experiences, each leading to a book, and I felt like that the last book I wrote, Unseen Forces, would be turned into a documentary. Don't ask me why, and in fact it is. Um, I wrote a book that's also based on the documentary to summarize essentially what our objective was, which is essentially to not only entertain and educate, but to provide a very thought-provoking film so that people can understand that consciousness is primary, that ESP and UAPs, near-death experiences, are valid. These are not concepts that people make up or are a manifestation of an hallucination or falsehoods. These are real experiences that people of all walks of life, in the millions worldwide, globally, of course, and historically in every epoch, have been experiencing in varying ways. In fact, there are over 200 different types of extraordinary human experiences, let alone the more common ones that we often debate about, like near-death and out-of-body experiences, etc. But the UAP, you mentioned it earlier. The new news that I have, Andrew, regarding the UAP is nothing that's overly dramatic, other than it does seem to be a non-physical event, as well as a physical event. That's nothing new to hear, but my colleague Russ Scalpone just completed a study of the Phoenix Lights, that historic uh, major mass sighting of a mile-long V-shaped UAP over Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix, Arizona. I forget the year, was it 97 or 98? And approximately 10 separate flying discs were seen being emanated from that mile-long um, object that covered 4 different states that night. It wasn't only seen in Phoenix, Arizona. The point is, he interviewed 115 people who experienced the Phoenix Lights, and the big news was that they had a spiritual experience, which is interesting. They became more attuned to themselves. They felt actually more spiritual, more happy, less egoic. There was like a dissolution of ego. They became more humane, more sympathetic and compassionate. So they say, so they report, but generally more spiritual in nature. They felt that they received, in fact, spiritual messages, messages of love and hope, messages that we are destroying the ecology of our planet. Many of the things that we've heard throughout the years when people describe interactions with non-human entities and how we are mistreating our planet and each other, certainly, and the threat of nuclear war, which is possibly even threatening their existence. Who knows? But the results from the Phoenix Lights Experiences Survey by Russell Scalpone and Len Katai was similar, Andrew, to the results of the Free Foundation, the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Research Foundation for Extraterrestrial Encounters, which I was a member of, and we wrote an article that was published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. What was very supportive to me was that the results that the Phoenix Lights Experiences Survey showed was consistent with the free study results done on over 3,200 individuals. And we asked them over 600 questions relating to the physical as well as the non-physical aspect of the phenomena. And as you may recall, the best way I could describe a UAP interaction, if we can get into that arena for a second, is that people claim it to be similar to an out-of-body experience. They actually feel like they're entering another matrix, a non-earthly environment. And this could be aboard a starship, or it could be in somebody's bedroom. But these physical landings, these traces that were more common in the 70s and 80s and 90s, don't seem to be as common anymore. But abduction scenarios, and I hate that term abduction, so let's use interaction with non-human intelligences instead, seems to be ongoing. I've known too many people, far more balanced than I, who claim to have interactions with non-human entities, not in a dream state either. Well, obviously, it can be confused with a dream state, but in a lucid, a fully awake, conscious individual, um, any time of the day, at home or not, interact with a non-human entity. A former colleague, a member of Free, Ray Hernandez, was driving his car in Miami, Florida one day, and the next second he's aboard a spacecraft talking to a non-human entity and being shown, supposedly, according to Ray, the secrets of the universe, how all these extraordinary human experiences, as we are mentioning, are all interrelated, and that consciousness is primary, and consciousness integrates all of these experiences, and in turn, he's written books on the topic. This concept, in fact, was advocated a long time ago by a founder of psychology, Walter Johnson, Walter States, Maslow. They talk about these awe-inspiring experiences, Andrew, that millions of people have, whether it's with the UAP or it could be near death. It could be even observing a beautiful rainbow in the sky, a beautiful, profoundly subjective, life-altering experience. Maybe a rainbow in the sky won't do it, but the other kinds of experiences we're generally touching upon do, and they're not all fun and games. In the Free study, approximately 85% of the people who claimed to interact with the phenomenon said it was largely positive and beneficial, and it was spiritual, largely spiritual in nature, but also distressing, which was the case in about 20-25% of the cases. That was also the case seen in the Kathleen Martin MUFON experiences study and the Russ Galpone Phoenix Light study. It's not always 100% of the time pleasant, although the vast majority of the time it seems to be. But it can be distressing, just like near-death experiences, about 20% of the time are distressing. The vast majority of the time is largely positive. But throughout these kinds of experiences, Andrew, people are asking the same questions that perplex them and send them down the rabbit hole as truth seekers, the questions of why me? What happened? Who do I tell? How can I explain what happened to me to anybody without fearing ridicule? Can I go to a professional about it, or will they consider me abnormal with a psychiatric problem? Uh, these types of questions, and there are others certainly, are not uncommon. They are understandable given the profound subjective experiences that people have. And just now, the medical community is acknowledging near-death experiences as a valid event. They realize people are aware of their own death. Apparently, there's even a recent study indicating that you can be aware of your own death for up to a period of 1 to 2 hours after the brain dies. It may be that parts of the brain that can provide feedback or mental intention of some type remain functioning. Takes time to die, if you know what I'm saying. While the blood supply is decreasing and stops, it still takes time to die. So people may even be aware of their own death for a period of time. If they're resuscitated, however, they may have the near-death experience and enter the tunnel, the brilliant light, the feeling of love, as they all proclaim. That too is in our film. And one thing about the film that kind of ties this all together, Andrew, is when we were interviewing Bruce Grayson, a psychiatrist who's a leading near-death experiencer researcher. I'm sure you know who he is. He said, when we were interviewing him for the film, he said, Bob, the near-death experience can change a person overnight in such positive ways, in ways in which medicine can spend days, weeks, months, and years trying to improve upon, and we can't. Yet again, the near-death experience can accomplish that overnight. Now that's a significant concept, and that is because people are changed from that moment going forward. Again, largely for the positive, especially if they experience the love and joy of their deceased relatives that they claim to interact with, experience the love of what they claim as a deities, experiencing beautiful landscapes and going through your life review where you experience everything apparently in your life from your perspective as well as from the perspective of the individual you interacted with. So it becomes a learning experience for you to understand better the impact of your experiences on those of others. So the field, obviously, Andrew, you can see by my constant discussion here is more than complex, and I try to break it down into individual components and parts in my new book, The Consciousness Connection, which is on Amazon. Thank you. But the point is, each one in and of itself needs to be further researched and analyzed in order to develop an integrative approach whereby we have a paradigm shift in our society. This Newtonian physics, which we work under, does not answer these questions that we have about the paranormal, parapsychology, near death, UAP. Newtonian physics is not designed to do so. It doesn't qualify evidence, and the large evidence in our field is mainly qualitative. It's subjective. Person has a near-death experience. That evidence of their experience is subjective. It can't be measured with Newtonian physics, you see. So that's the large impeding factor of why we can't have a paradigm shift anytime soon, because the scholars that of today work under large, with few exception, of course, but the vast majority work under that Newtonian scientific method, which doesn't apply to the subjective nature of these extraordinary human experiences that we're touching upon. That's why we'll never come to a true answer with UAP. I hope I'm wrong, and maybe we do have a secret base with confiscated, physical craft and beings stationed somewhere. That may very well be the case, but we can't prove it. And I don't know if it ever will be proved until that UFO lands on the White House lawn. But I do believe that evidence lies in the minds of people. That's what John Mack said, the psychiatrist, of course, who had a fight for tenure at Harvard, when he claimed that the 340 people he interviewed reported that they interacted with non-human entities, and he believed that they were sincere and well balanced. They had nothing to gain by divulging that information. So he advocated for people interacting with non-human entities, which his administration took offense to. You with me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't really make it clear that you were done there, but thank you for getting into that. So yes, did jot down a few notes there, and mention a few things I want to elaborate on. You said that you were had acquaintance with Free. Now, I hate to pick on people, but sometimes I like to pick on people. John Ventry of the Pennsylvania MUFON chapter, been to a few of his conferences. I believe he's actually about to make a run for governor of Pennsylvania. Give him a lot of credit for that one. I'm sure he'd make a great governor with some of the things he could bring to light in people's awareness. But a couple things that he has said that that I take issue with. Well, first of all, the way he bashed ancient aliens. He likes to pick on George Tsoukalos sometimes. So he shows that cartoon image in his talk sometimes of George Tsoukalos tied to a chair with a gray alien holding a caveman club, pointing a finger at him, saying, "Hey, buddy, quit making stuff up." I kind of find that ridiculous. I don't think if George is making things up, he's not doing it on purpose. I'm sure he's very true to his heart with his ancient aliens material. And John Ventry has also for whatever well, he did give his reasons why. It was a while back, and I'm kind of drawing a blank on why he thought this. but he actually made the assertion that free is a complete and total fraud. And I'm sure you are rolling your eyes, maybe have steam blowing out your ears right now to hear me say that because you were acquainted with him. But if you want to debunk John Ventry and tell him you don't know what you're talking about, I'd like to give you the opportunity now to give your side of the story. You seem to think that free is definitely a legitimate organization. I did have Ray Hernandez and one of his other colleagues on my show way back in the day. I had no reason to think that it was a fraud from that interview. Do you have any idea why John Ventry may be believing what he is there? And can you put to rest his assertion that Free is a fraudulent organization?
Yeah, well, no, free. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Free certainly isn't a fraudulent organization. I don't know. I can't comment as to why, in his mind, he feels that it is, because it's survey based, and survey based studies are open to attack. Because it's anecdotal evidence, and a lot of people want hard and fast quantitative data that can be analyzed in that manner, a physical evidence, in other words, which this free data certainly isn't. It is based, however, on the reports of over 3,200 individuals who claim to have conscious recall. Now, we're taking their word for it, and there are certainly many negatives aspects of survey studies, but there are also many positive ones as well. The fact that we had over 3,200 individuals, with 80% of them to 85% of them saying, being very consistent in their reports of both non-physical and physical aspects of the phenomena, add validity to the results. And not only that, the results from Kathleen Martin's MUFON Experiences study in 2018 and Russ Galpone and Lincoln Tide's Phoenix Experiencer Light Phoenix Experiencer survey study also was consistent with the free results. So we have three surveys essentially saying the same thing. 80% saying that they were positive. Martin's study had about 500. Again, ours had 3,200. Scalpone had about 115. But again, they were consistent, saying that people receive spiritual messages. It is largely positive. It is like an out-of-body experience when they interact with these beings. But it can be distressing, as I mentioned earlier, about 20% of the time. Survey studies certainly can be kicked around and negatively criticized. That's fair game. There are negative aspects to survey studies. I'm well aware of studies given their scientific credibility, because I have been involved in research much of my life. It is not an ideal study. It doesn't fall under Newtonian designs, if you know what I mean. So all survey studies that are going to address interactions with non-human intelligences are going to shake the heads of most scholars of today, by virtue of just the nature of the study being surveyed and the concept, interactions with non-human entities. That's far out. You know, you're trying to tie two things together here, and it's hard to convince anybody of the validity of those results. That's why these studies serve as preliminary studies that need to be built upon by other scholars for demonstrating consistency. And that's why just recently the Phoenix Light study came out supporting the free study results. Now, Ventry, who I can't say anything good or bad, I don't know of him, if he would spend the time reviewing the literature of MUFON study and the Phoenix Light study, with which was presented at the Journal of the Society for Scientific Exploration just 2 months ago. If he would take the time to review that material, he may be in a better position to assess the validity of the free results.
Thank you very much. As far as the ancient aliens thing go, I think John Ventry can't help but be a little jealous over the fact that his show, Hangar One, not really his show, he was a frequent guest on that show. That show got the boot off the History Channel, and Ancient Aliens is still flourishing on the History Channel, and he can't help but hold a slight grudge over Ancient Aliens over the fact that they're still flourishing and being able to talk about what they're talking about. His show Hangar One got the boot. But could you perhaps maybe, do you have any chance have any theory on why it is that a show like Hangar One, which was, well, basically all UFO, mostly UFO and ET related stuff, modern era kind of thing with a little bit of history involved, would get kicked off the History Channel, while a show like Ancient Aliens would not have gotten kicked off this channel? Any theories on why?
Well, I have no idea. I mean, the reasons could be based on the analytics of the sponsoring agency who produced the films. Sometimes these decisions are made just by the number of viewers and the time in which they viewed the film, and these decisions are often determined by the sponsoring company, whether it's Gaia or the History Channel or Discovery Channel or whomever. It just may not be popular, or there could be political reasons, but forces from the outside, claiming that it should or should not be on. I don't know how much of an effect that would have, but largely these are internal-based decisions that are determined by the metrics, the analytics of viewership.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Didn't realize I was on mute there, but anyhow, now that documentary you said is on Amazon. Is that free on Amazon, or do people have to pay a fee to watch that?
People have to pay around $8 to become a member of Gaia, and you have access to their many documentaries, many of which are excellent, and they can watch our film and be a subscriber. But yeah, you have to subscribe in order to view it, and that's the big ask involved. It's not free.
It's not free. Okay, well, that's all right. Everybody's got to make a living somehow, and nothing wrong with charging.
Yeah,
a fee
we don't make money that way. Gaia makes money that way. You know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Now, life after death. You have things to say about that subject. It's title of one of your books. It's interesting. We're talking about this. I was listening to Brad Johnson, who channels Adronis, and he did a question and answer session recently where he was communicating with the entity Adronis. And one of the questions that one of his listeners gave was, if you are a bad boy in your human life, is your life after death going to be unpleasant? Because you got to face the consequences of what you did in life. Is your life going to be after death going to be miserable? I guess was the question. And the interesting thing was Adronis didn't actually really answer the question. He basically said, are you the same person are you a different person when you die as you are in the present life? And the answer, interestingly, maybe you can give your take on this, he said, no. Your consciousness now, your consciousness then. The fact that you did bad things in life does not change the fact that you are the same entity that you were as a human than you are when your life as a human comes to an end. Well, I can't help but ask, do you have any theory on why he didn't really directly answer the question? He just answered it the way that he did. And after that, do you have anything to say about what the penalties are for after death, if there are any? Because I had a psychic medium channel a friend of mine who died of heroin overdose, who had a very traumatic life, left behind 3 children, and I feel very bad for her for that. But she actually said during the session that heaven, everybody goes to heaven, but heaven is not very pleasant if you have very traumatic memories of your life. And she has a lot of traumatic memories. The most traumatic, of course, is the fact that her 3 kids will never have a mother because she died of heroin overdose. And well, can you maybe expand on that, about what you can say about people, their life after death in heaven won't be so pleasant because they got bad memories? And Do you have any theories on why Adronis would not really directly answer the question and just said you're the same after death as you are before death?
Well, the main answer is there's no way to know for sure about any of this, because we have to first obviously decide whether or not consciousness is distinctly different than the brain, and whether or not it persists after the death of the brain. That's the first question. And then the only best way to answer that, as far as I can see, is that people who commit suicide or who are very bad people in life, psychopaths and narcissists, etc., criminals, they also have positive near-death experiences. It doesn't equate with bad people having bad, distressing NDEs or positive NDEs. They still have positive experiences, but their life review is more traumatic. They see the impact, the frequent impact, these are negative individuals, of their actions on others. And you like to think that they learn from this. Apparently, supposedly, the life review is designed for that purpose, so that you could judge the impact of your actions on others and learn accordingly, so that you don't do it again in other future lifetimes, assuming that consciousness is an evolving entity, with each life serving as let's say, a training ground for the next one. So if you're bad in this life, hopefully you learn from your near-death experience and take that with you to improve upon. But we all come from different relative planes of normalcy, and some people are act like saints, while some people are criminals by nature. And hopefully we can only hope that it's an evolving process with each new generation, bringing souls on board who've learned from their prior negative background experiences, and are providing positive impacts in their relationships with others.
Well, thank you for touching on that. Now, regarding consciousness and its connection to soul and spirit, George Kavasilis, a metaphysics expert from Australia, who I have the utmost respect for, he said that his take on consciousness is that it's not the highest power. The highest power is soul, and he said that that consciousness and spirit emanate from soul, while some entities and beings and factions say soul and spirit are the same. Others say there is a difference. And the way George Kavasilis, as I remember, he described it, is that spirit is the manifestation of soul within that the manifestations happen within the acknowledged illusion of time and spatial illusions, but in the illusion we experience, we don't really see it as an illusion, and your spirit is having experiences within that, and the spirit is a specific part of soul that emanates into space-time to have an experience. He actually said that you can think of a spear being thrown at something. He said, throw a spear at it, and the spear is the part of soul, and the it is the part in space-time that it's having an experience in. And he said that consciousness, which people have many people have described as being the awareness of being aware, if the best definition you can give it, also emanates from soul. Do you see that as an appropriate way of looking at soul versus consciousness and spirit?
That's a good question, and it has been debated extensively. And the concept of semantics comes to mind, because when we talk about the mind, soul, spirit, consciousness, most people see it as the same thing, and it's used interchangeably. The point is, you can't prove the distinction between mind and consciousness, or soul and mind. Although when you say mind, you're normally referring to consciousness, like you say, aware, or being aware, the essence of what it feels like to be me. in a sense, something that goes beyond the hard problem of consciousness or qualia, where in the brain, in other words, it's a representation of our profound subjective experiences. We can't seem to locate it. So does that mean that's our consciousness, the essence of who we are? And is that the mind? Although many scholars associate mind with brain, but we know, like through psychosomatic disease and the placebo effect, the mind, if we believe or don't believe in something, can have a direct impact on the body. So there is a distinction between the body and the mind, certainly, but it involves mental intuition and higher cognitive functioning levels, which is the brain to some extent. But we're looking at something that acts interdependently with the brain, and that's what consciousness is. To me, it is a separate entity, but it is primary. But while consciousness is in the body, called spirit, called your soul, um, it, it must be interdependent, interacts with the body. They depend on each other. But once the body no longer functions, it is reported, at least by millions of individuals, and over 320 million people in the United States have had a near-death experience already, over 1 billion worldwide. They contend that it is just a separate entity, the essence of you, that persists after bodily death. At least those who have the NDE say. So when you start breaking down, like that gentleman did, spirit versus mind and spirit versus soul, it gets complicated, because these are terms that have religious, spiritual, metaphysical meanings, and are interpreted differently across different spiritual traditions. So you could easily get hung up by use of these terms. In fact, there was a recent study, 2017, I believe, where the term consciousness, often used obviously within the context in which we're talking about, actually in the there were 1,000 studies on consciousness, and of those studies there were 30 different meanings that were used to define consciousness, let alone the term soul, spirit, etc., which are again used fairly interchangeably among individuals.
Thank you. Now, looking at your website here, bobdavisspeaks.com, there's actually an interview down at the very bottom here. Not sure when this interview was done. Unfortunately, I didn't get to listen to it. I don't know if this was an interview, well, somebody interviewed you, or whether this is just you by yourself, but the interview is called Buddha at the Gas Pump. Of all the titles to give an interview, Buddha and Gas Pump. Actually, it's interesting. There's actually a registered trademark logo after the word pump. So I'm wondering what the significance of that is. What does Buddha have to do with a gas pump? What's with the registered trademark? What is the gas pump thing? And what was that interview about?
I don't know why Rick Archer, who runs that, why he named it that way. But he discusses a lot of topics on Buddhism, but he addresses all different concepts. There's over 700 episodes already. But why he denotes that term, I don't know. But it people don't forget it once it's uttered. So maybe that was a motivating factor. But much of his discussion, centered around just what we're talking about, really. The concept of consciousness, and the movie, the book, of course, and the validity of extraordinary human experiences which defy logic, but much must be addressed, because many of these extraordinary experiences facilitate changes in people's existence, and people describe it as a spiritual awakening. So when they have these effects, it promotes positive after effects in themselves and others and the world around them. Again, hinting that consciousness is primary. And about 2/3 of those who even have a near-death experience report changes in their attitudes, beliefs, and values in life. So we need a paradigm shift to recognize the intense incidence, the high incidence of these so-called truth seekers. But it's not only because we have extraordinary human experiences with near-death studies. Extrasensory perception is an area where I think the major finding in the area of extrasensory perception in terms of denoting its validity and non-locality is that it is a normal feature of human performance, and scholars are beginning to figure that out. And what was it? Professor of psychology, Cardania was his name. He did a comprehensive review of the parapsychological evidence, and he condensed findings of around 1,500 different experiments and in peer-reviewed academic journals over the years, and he highlighted statistically significant results supporting the existence of ESP. And he made a very strong case for its existence, saying that it was comparable to that for established phenomena in psychology and other disciplines. So based on his research, which was extremely extensive, the APA, or the American Psychological Association, also came up with the same conclusion and supported the reality of parapsychology, of ESP, and that they contend it can't be explained away by the quality of the study, or fraud, or any incompetence of the researchers. So ESP is acknowledged to exist, at least within the domain of science. So you have the validity of ESP, you have near-death experiences, you have 3 different studies that support UAP in terms of interactions with non-human entities. So I'm looking at the subjective aspect of it. And then you add to that veridical experiences. I didn't even mention that in near-death experiences, where people claim to that where they retrieve information during a near-death experience that they could not have had unless they have left their body, and that it was verified by an independent third party. And these veridical perceptions are remarkable, because if you start reading about it, you realize that the only way the person could have received this information was if they indeed left their body somehow in order to retrieve it. And when we were doing the documentary, we interviewed Bruce Grayson, who I mentioned, I think, earlier, the psychiatrist and leading NDE researcher, and just for instance, just so the audience can understand what a veridical perception is, so all of them can. I'm sure some do, but he told me a story that forced him to research NDEs for the rest of his life, and it went something like this. He was a psychiatrist in the hospital, and he had a patient who had severe pneumonia, had to be resuscitated, or would have died. And his primary nurse worked with him every day. Her name was Anita, and she had to take a long weekend off. And she told him his name was Jack. And Anita told Jack that there'd be other nurses substituting for her, and that while she was gone, he had another respiratory arrest. I think he had a very bad asthma, and he had an NDE during his respiratory arrest, and found himself in a beautiful pastor, and to his surprise, he saw Anita in his NDE, his primary nurse, and she came towards him, and of course he does a double take and says, "Anita, what are you doing here?" And she says, "Jack, you need to go back. I want you to go and find my parents, tell them I love them very much, and I am sorry that I wrecked the red MGB." Now, this was back in the 70s in South Africa, and there weren't a lot of MGBs there, let alone red MGBs. So when Jack awoke in the hospital bed, he started to tell the first nurse that he saw about his fantastic experience, and she got she started to cry and ran out of the room because it turned out that his nurse Anita did take the weekend off, of course, to celebrate her 21st birthday, but her parents surprised her with a gift of a red MGB. Okay, she got so excited, she jumped in the car, took it for a test drive. She crashed it into a telephone pole and died instantly a few hours before he had his NDE. So there is no way that Jack could have known at the time that she had died, or certainly how she had died, but yet he did know. And we have a lot of cases like this, like these vertical perceptions that have been corroborated. Um, so, I mean, even Eben Alexander, who wrote the popular book Proof of Heaven, he was a neurosurgeon who, during his NDE, was riding on the wings of a butterfly with a beautiful woman whom he recognized unmistakably 4 months later in a photograph that he received, because he didn't know who that woman was because he was adopted and she had died prior to his being adopted, but his parents eventually shared the photo with him, and he said that photo of the woman was the exact same woman who was on the butterfly wing riding with him in that pasture during his NDE. So in a sense, that's also a veridical perception.
Thank you. I don't know how much of an expert you are on karma, but I want to touch on the subject a little bit. If you're so big on consciousness, then I'm sure that karma has to play a factor in life, because some people have said that for all intents and purposes, the purpose of life is to resolve karma. And when it comes to manifesting karma, one has to wonder if you actually, let's say hypothetically, you are an income tax accountant, and you actually think you're doing good for humanity by helping them with their taxes. And then all of a sudden, someone introduces that income tax accountant to Dave Champion's book, Income Tax Shattering the Myths, which exposes that the federal income tax, how appropriate I'm talking about this not too long after tax day, does not apply to people doing business within the 50 several states of America. Now, pretty much every income tax accountant who were to hear that and maybe read the book for themselves, even though the evidence is in their face that they're actually committing fraud by being an income tax accountant, they are going to flat out refuse to believe that they are doing anything wrong, because they're so used to being an income tax accountant, they're not going to want to change their paradigm. They're not going to believe that they're doing anything wrong. But that raises the question now, if you don't know that you're doing anything wrong by being an income tax accountant, one would think you're not going to manifest karma for yourself, because you've been your state of consciousness has been taught that you're doing good for humanity. But if you were to find out that you're actually doing bad for humanity and are helping the government get away with a fraud, then does that mean that from that point onward, that when you know the truth, you're actually going to manifest bad karma for yourself because you know the truth, but you're just ignoring it anyway because you can't believe it? Do you have any take on that? That people who know the truth will manifest more bad karma for themselves?
Well, yeah, people who do bad things are going to feel guilt. The true narcissist lacks that ability, lacks empathy, doesn't feel the guilt. They like to instill that they like to cheat people and make them insane. That's how they get their jollies. But you do create your own karma. If you do something for someone who is not a narcissist or a psychopath, they will do negative things, but they will, in return, they will suffer the consequences in one way or another. I fully believe in karma. It's very popular in the Hindu and Buddhism traditions, not so here in Western society. But I believe that we ourselves who develop tremendous amount of guilt and too strong an ego, seeking power, wealth, and fame, uh, too much so, uh, while not stroking the good in life as much as we should, and exercising self-compassion and things that are only good for humanity and society at large. One's guilt affects one's ego, and if if you don't have guilt, you have ego dissolution, where you do have greater compassion and sympathy for people, sensitive to the ecology of life, because you don't feel as if you're the center of the universe anymore. Without that negative karma, you're not it. The world doesn't revolve around you. The world is not at the mercy of your feet. By not having guilt and having good karma, you have ego dissolution. You, 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 in a sense, revolve around the central core, where you contribute in positive ways to the welfare of society, to the benefit of other humans, and to yourself in very spiritual and non-spiritual ways. So yes, karma is real, and people have to understand that their negative influences do have negative consequences, and their positive ones will have positive consequences as well.
Well, on that note, a related issue of how is your life going to change if you're giving out information that's pissing people off? Now, that example I gave, where so you tells an income tax accountant you're perpetrating a fraud, and here's the evidence that shows you have no choice but to acknowledge that. Well, the income tax accountant is going to get pissed off. Like, I mean, 9/11 Truth Movement has a lot to say about this. You have an idea how many people they've pissed off with what they've said about 9/11 being a lie to people who don't want to believe that. And but the question I have here is now the people that are trying to they're not trying to piss people off by getting them the truth. They're trying to help humanity by getting out the truth. It's kind of an unavoidable consequence that they're going to piss people off because people don't want to know or believe something if knowing or believing it will make them terrified. So that raises the question: the person who's trying to do the awakening but is pissing people off by doing the awakening, does the fact that they are pissing people off because the people they're pissing off can't handle the truth mean that they will suffer simply because they are pissing people off even though they're trying to do good, if that's the best way I can phrase the
No,
question?
no, as long as the intention is there, as long as your intention is good or bad, that's a deciding factor. How your intention, I understand what you're saying. It gets complicated, of course. But if my intention is good, but that intention is adversely affecting others, I shouldn't be uh, reprimanded or suffer any negative consequences before it, because my intention was ethical. It has to be considered consensually as ethical good intention, regardless of how that intention impacted others, either good or bad.
uh, oh, okay, but well, your intention, I have no doubt, has a big role in it. But I also want to ask, how much of a role does the manner in which you present it make? Like, I've been criticized for having a good attitude or a bad attitude, and some people say I really like your attitude, Andrew. But I mean, the attitude, sometimes you have to have a little bit of an attitude to get the message across. Like if you're trying to tell someone, "Lay, I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable, but here's the truth," or but is that really you're not really going to get the message across to them because you're being gentle. Gentle dialogue, they say, is a good way to get the information out, but sometimes you kind of you have to get in the person's face to wake them up, but with a "listen, you ignorant, gullible, naive fool" kind of mentality. Here, like, you have to be in their face to like get the message out. Even though, well, the problem is, though, even though your intention is good, as long as if your attitude is not really good with the way you're trying to get the message out, how much of is that going to be a factor? The attitude by which you give out the try to give out the information.
Well, yeah, exactly. The attitude will play a major role because attitude is part of the message. How you express it via your attitude relays the intention, a part of the intention of your message. So it will have karmic-like effects without question. So I would say your attitude plays a predominant role in how you're getting across the information. You can be doing it too directly, too demonstratively, too critically, too unethically, and you could be completely expressing falsehoods. So it's hard to say, but in general, if you have good intentions and it's considered ethical, it's going to be cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
that's yeah, okay. Yeah, think. Well, there's a lot of things we don't really know. There's a lot of unseen forces. That's one of the titles of your books, Unseen Forces, because visible light is only a small part of what we can see, of course. So I guess, well, that's the last question I'm going to have for you, and then we'll I'll let you finish with anything you'd like to get out. But unseen forces, naturally, as your consciousness rises, you're going to be able to perceive things that normally you can't perceive with the five senses. And I don't know if unseen is the right word, because it's not just sight we're talking about, it's other senses. So when it comes to raising your consciousness, do you have any take on what if you're raising your consciousness, what forces are people who raise their consciousness going to perceive before others that don't raise their consciousness cannot perceive? What are the first things that you think people will notice, or does it vary by the individual?
I think people will become more sensitive to the emotions of others, to the needs of others, not only of others but also of society, and I do believe that will predominate. Your attitude towards others is the main thing. It's all about ego, a strong ego versus a non-strong ego dissolution. And your ego will dictate your attitude and will dictate how you treat people. And what your lack of giving or your willingness to give to others in a mature, normal, loving and caring manner for the good of others. I mean, it's unseen, certainly, but we have these things called biophotons or light energy in our body, and they are shared with other consciousnesses. Biophotons or these ultra weak photon emissions of light energy emanate from our cells and DNA, and it's been found to be a force of nature and can very well may represent an energy field that it interacts with in order to form consciousness. Biophotons and torsion energy, a carrier wave that might enable parapsychology to occur, acting as a sort of conveyor belt for biophotons or light energy to travel among individuals.
Well, thank you very much for touching on that. So we've gone a little bit over an hour. Didn't really go for an hour because I also upload my interviews to Cost.tv, which only allows for hour max. So this one, because we went a little over an hour, I'll probably have to divide it into 2 parts to upload there. But it will be uploaded to YouTube. Yeah, YouTube's gone through a lot of censorship, but I'm just going to ride the YouTube horse so it falls down dead as long as my channel's still up there. I'm just going to keep doing it. And I guess I still have to watch what I say, though. With the censorship isn't as bad, though. I've actually noticed, well, on Facebook anyway, some things that used to be banned on Facebook, you can actually upload now. So I hope the same thing is true with YouTube.
Great.
And so that's a good sign.
How
And
large is your viewership?
it's 6,500. I mean, it should be more. I'd like it to be more, but then again, if it was more, it would probably be a little bit of a, it would probably be a problem because the big view channels are the ones that get the boot. The fact that my channel subscription base isn't so big may be one of the reasons I haven't been kicked off yet. So it's kind of a bittersweet blessing and a curse thing there. So,
Well,
but
thanks for having me back. I appreciate
any
it.
last thing you want to get out before we call it a day?
Well, I just certainly want to encourage people to look at the movie, The Consciousness Connection, on Amazon TV. They can go to consciousness.media. Also, my website is bobdavidspeaks.com. And my book is The Consciousness Connection, Extraordinary Human Experiences and the Nature of Reality. And that can be found on Amazon.
Well, thank you very much. I will upload this to YouTube. Hopefully, got a lot of things to do today, but I should by midnight tomorrow, Sunday, have it uploaded, and I'll send you the link when I upload it, so you are free to promote and get it out to everyone.
I will promote it. Thank you very
much.
Awesome.
Take care. Namaste. Have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.